Hi, my name is Rik Offenberger, and I'd like to welcome you to MLJ Shield 80th Anniversary panel at WonderCon at Home. I've got some friends here with me, and I'd like them to introduce themselves so you know who we've got on the panel. Jeff, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm JC Vaughn, Vice President of Publishing for the Overstreet Comic Book Price Guide, longtime collector and comic book historian and comic book writer.
Paul?
Hi, I'm Paul Castiglia. I've written and edited comics for many years, and I'm also a comic book historian, and I've worked on some trade paperbacks for Archie Comics with all their classic superheroes, and also a book with you and Jon, Rik and Jon, I should say, the MLJ Companions. So love these Archie superheroes, especially the Shield.
Jon?
Yeah, my name is Jon B. Cooke. I am the editor of Comic Book Creator magazine and author and historian of comic books. My most recent book is The World of Tomorrows, A History of Tomorrow's Publishing, and last year I also authored the Book of Weirdo about the comics humor anthology.
Oh, the MLJ characters have been very near and dear to my heart. When the internet first started, I started with a Shield-only website, and then made a lot of friends who also had Mighty Crusader websites. And that led to Archie's attorney contacting me and wanting information on the British publications. And that's how I ended up meeting Michael and ended up working at Archie for 10 years. And so these characters have been very near and dear to my heart and also very nice to me professionally. So I'm excited to do this panel. Everyone has a different version of the Shield that they grew up and loved based on their age. Some people love the Golden Age Shield. Some people love the Mighty Comics with Bill Higgins and Joe Higgins Jr. because they couldn't figure it out. And then meet a lot of fans who love the Impact versions because their age group, that's when they met them. Impact put out a huge quantity of books. And of course, the Red Circle people have been putting out the books recently, and that became Dark Circle, and they're developing new fans there. So there's really something for everyone and a different version for everyone. And while you might think there are a lot of versions, you know, look at Hawkman, how many different versions of Hawkman DC has done, it's still the same idea. And if you look at, you know, if you're a fan of Firestorm, you know, he comes and goes and comes and goes, and sometimes he's part of the Justice League. And the same thing happens with the Shield and the Mighty Crusaders. They publish them for a while, they take a break, and then they come back just like all your other favorite heroes. Paul wanted to start with some things about the Golden Age version of the Shield. So Paul, why don't you take this away?
Oh, sure. Well, first and foremost, for anyone out there who doesn't know, the Shield was the first patriotic comic book hero. He predated Captain America by a year. And it's pretty extraordinary when you think about it. And if you look at his costume, if you're familiar at all with the first Captain America story, the origin story, well, Captain America had a shield that is basically the whole, you know, neck to waist emblem that you see on the Shield's costume. You know, that was changed, of course, for reasons you could probably guess. It ended up working in Captain America's favor because they redesigned his shield to be round, and so it had a lot of great aerodynamics to it. But the Shield, you know, the similarities don't end with the red, white, and blue. Even the origins, at first, they basically attributed his powers to the costume itself. But then after a bunch of stories in Pep Comics, when he got his own title co-sharing it with the Wizard, Shield Wizard Comics #1 in 1940, they actually had a super serum in that comic. Basically gave them all the same powers of invisibility, speed, the whole thing. I'll see if I could share to the screen here that shows the formula real quick so we could all see it. Let's see if it works. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, there we go.
Indeed.
Yeah, so this kind of gives you the outline of how you can you know, become a super-powered, super patriotic character, basically. And so basically that was part of the formula. And it basically just goes into his spinal cord, super strength in the spinal cord, the power to pump blood endlessly, the nerves, the power of sight, ability to breed, and the skin, most importantly, which is impenetrable. So you can see, a little maybe hokier and maybe weirder than how they explain it in the Captain America origin, but still there it is, right? So you can see those similarities there. But one thing I really want to touch on that just blew my mind when I was researching and compiling the Shield archive collection for Archie was that there was a series of stories where he was battling the fictitious Mosconians. And simultaneously to those stories taking place, over in Top Notch, the Wizard was also battling them. And in Top Notch number 5, the Wizard has a premonition that the Mosconians are going to attack Pearl Harbor. And then over in Pep Comics, is it issue number 4 or 5? I think number 4 maybe. They do attack it, and the Shield faces that. And this is like a year and a half before this even happened in real life. So just like this, one of these incredible weird things that are unexplainable, but there it is. So yeah, I mean, the other thing about the Shield was that in the Golden Age stories, he actually reported to J. Edgar Hoover. So he was, a commissioned G-man. So they kind of, even though they skirted around real life villains in the beginning, they did put J. Edgar Hoover in there. And then once we were really involved in World War II, then all bets were off. And like every other comic book superhero, they fought real Nazis and Axis powers. So yeah, it's of its time, and I just love it.
One of the things I always liked was that FBI element, because gangster films were real popular and G-men were real popular. And although there was a Shield G-Man club, there was also a regular G-Man club, and you could be a junior G-Man. And it was nice that they tied into pop culture at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'm in my capacity as a film historian, I'm working on a documentary about the Dead End Kids and the Bowery Boys, and they actually had a serial, 2 of them, I think, junior G-Men serials, and it was like really popular, to like say, hey, you could help, be patriotic and fight for the American cause in the war. So
when you look at that phrase, junior G-Man, that popped up in a lot of places, including my dad's high school yearbook.
Yeah, absolutely. And it certainly inspired Jack Kirby when he created the Kid Gang comics. But that's really my take on the whole Golden Age Shield. Just it was of its time, and stories are pretty amazing, well drawn, I think. The colors, just the concepts, wild, and lots of action. So great Golden Age comics.
John, when did you get into the Mighty Crusaders?
It was definitely it was definitely in the 70s, as back issues that I found. And they were so hokey that they were positively charming. I was actually very attracted to them in them trying to replicate the Batmania kind of bam pow, the campy aspect of it. I can't attest to their quality, but I've always found them really charming and endearing, and how earnest they were. I really have a thing for earnest comics, so that opens the door to both excellence and not so excellent. The characters themselves, I love the aspect that they were tied to the Archie universe, of the Riverdale gang of Archie and Jughead and Reggie and Betty and Veronica. It was a little bit ancillary, but I believe on the cover of one Jughead comic book, it was in a supermarket, a superhero in a supermarket, and that was a charming connection of making an absolute direct connection between the Riverdale kids. And, you know, it was really trying to find them in back issue bins. I love that aspect of, you know, stumbling upon another one of these odd 1960s comics that Archie published, and that I hadn't seen before. So that was basically it for me as far as that goes. Have I collected? You know, and I also connected with John Morrow. He's just a huge fan of that, and he actually is the publisher of the MLJ Companion. And
You have another copy.
Yeah, a couple of them. Somehow you guys allowed me to be a co-author of the book. I was just designing the book, but I just, you know, worked to fill out certain aspects of the history of Archie and the MLJ characters. So thanks, guys.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
when did you get into the MLJ characters?
First brief initial exposure was when I worked at Lone Star in the early 80s, and that particular resurgence of Mighty Crusaders came out. And that Mighty Crusaders #1 was a pretty cool comic. But I never really got into it until Paul was working on the Shield collection. And Bob Overstreet asked me to just go through and fact check his foreword before he submitted his introduction to the book. And I had never read a lot of the stories, and between Bob and thankfully my access to some of Steve Geppe's books, I was able to read some of them. So it wasn't just dry checking of dates. I actually got to sit down and read a few stories. And then when the book came out, I absolutely fell in love with this stuff. I think being a big Captain America fan, of course, I'm intrigued by the litigation or threat of litigation that led to the change of the Shield into the one that I knew growing up, and then the Shield's costume, him predating Cap by you know a year, the universe building aspects that you were talking about between the Wizard and Shield is something that, you know, they wouldn't use the term universe building concept back then, but now that's our thing in superhero comics, and we see that, and that was really compelling. And I think, John, you mentioned the earnestness of it, and I think that there's an incredibly true statement at the core of that. You can overlook a lot of things that are maybe not taking themselves seriously, but being true to themselves. And I'm parsing words here, but I really think I think that was really part of the charm for it for me.
Yeah, in the 60s, I always thought that they were not really trying to ape the Batman style or the Marvel style. Of course, they started before Marvel started, you know, relaunching their superheroes, but they were doing a comedy version of superheroes. They were a comedy company. It's a different flavor. It's not, oh, we want to do what Marvel's doing, but not do it as well, or we want to do what DC's doing. I think they really had their own flavor, and it ran through all the titles. I mean, they all had some elements of humor, and while like Peter Parker had a lot of angst, you know, you had some personal problems, but they were all kind of silly. And there was a lot of silliness to this that seemed to play out nicely, at least if that's what you're into.
Yeah,
Well, you know, I mean, the raison d'etre for the 1960 series was definitely the sales of Marvel Comics, and particularly the sales of the whole Batmania thing. But I agree that there was a lot of fun to be had by Jerry Siegel and company.
Right. I was just going to say, when you consider it's the guy who started the whole superhero thing, spoofing it, you know, it kind of, it's poetic in a way, because it's like, it's all those years he spent doing it, building it up, and now he's kind of like looking back at it with a sense of humor.
One of the things about that I don't think we spend any real time talking about is how adept Jerry Siegel was at doing that. You know, we think of Jerry Siegel, we think of Superman, Superboy, and other things along those lines. But here he's totally switching gears with that stuff. You know, and it's not mean-spirited making fun of it. It's good. It's very good-natured.
Yeah, a lot of it was a lot of fun. In the Shield stories, they couldn't keep track of whether he was Joe Higgins Jr. or Bill Higgins. And there's a fan fiction piece where they talk about they were twins. Because when Paul picked it up, he used Joe Higgins Jr. starting in the year 2000. And but in the Red Circle, they only talk about Bill, but they went back and forth, and there are equal numbers of times they used both ones. So I just assumed they're twins, and they dated the same girl, much less. We have that with Hangman and Comet. They're both dating the same girl, too.
Okay.
I mean, seriously, if your brother dies, naturally you become romantically involved with his girlfriend. That's the way it always works. That's the way it worked so well for Comet and Hangman. And not only that, they were the first superhero brothers. Comet's the first superhero who came back from the dead.
Yeah.
Hey, who wrote the web stories in the 1960s of him being a henpecked husband? Was that Jerry?
That should have been Jerry.
Those were really
great.
unusual comics for the time. I have to add them as a standout of that period.
They were very astute. They were really funny, like in a very astute way.
And corny.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you guys, because you guys literally wrote the book on this stuff. Aside from the Shield, which we all have established this affection for here, what's your other favorite MLJ character?
Ooh. Can I go?
Go first, John.
Yeah.
The Comet. The Comet,
Comet?
in the sense of that, what a unbelievable, groundbreaking aspect to a superhero continuity of having a character die and killed, and it being a springboard for another hero to emerge from that. And also, and I think underrated, I rarely see people talking about it too much, is Bill Dubé's take on the character in the 70s during the Red Circle. It was really interesting, and it predated the Dark Angst, or was it right around the same time of the Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen? And it was definitely an interesting take that was ended way too soon. So that's my jump.
Well, the Comet was created by Jack Cole, so a lot of those early stories are that amazing Jack Cole art and just out there imagination that he had, which was so beautiful. He's my favorite comic book writer artist of all time. Plastic Man is my favorite superhero. Right. So yeah, a Comet would be up there. But for me, I have this strange affinity. As I've told people many times, I'm not even quite sure why. Maybe it's the costume. I don't know. I have this affinity for Blackjack. He's very much like C-list, but there's something about that character, the way he looks, the attitude. A lot of the Golden Age stories were done by Sam Schwartz, who later went on to do like tons of Jughead stories. And when I started working at Archie Comics on staff, Sam was still doing those stories. And Sam was like the only guy who was allowed to just send in a completed story. He wrote it, he penciled it, he inked it, he lettered it. And he never sent the script in to Victor to have it reviewed first. He didn't have to. Victor just knew it was going to be hilarious. It was going to be drawn very dynamically with dynamic breaks in the panel layouts. And it was going to be just fun and great. And so they would just show up. And they were terrific. And you see that skill in his Golden Age Blackjack stories too. It's just this flippant character, literally and figuratively. He can flip, and he's kind of flippant. He's just like, I'm doing this because I really love adventuring and superheroing, and that's cool to me. That's, he's not brooding. He's just, I'm in it to serve justice. So yeah, Blackjack for me.
I like The Fly a lot. The Fly was a lot of fun. It starts off kind of like a cross with Captain Marvel, where he's a little kid and he's in an orphanage and he gets to become the Fly. But then, 5 issues in, they change up everything. And now he's an adult attorney, and they're more science fiction stories. It reminded me of Strange Adventures at DC. Not, where we had a lot of science fiction adversaries, and it was just, it was a lot of fun. And that was what led into the Mighty Crusaders, springing out of that book, and then Mighty Comics. And it just was a fun ride all the way through.
It was Barry Windsor Smith. His favorite take on how he was introduced to Kirby was through the comic he remembered as The Private Life of Double Strong. And of course it was the double life of Private Strong. But
I think that would be a great comic, though.
Yeah, truly. We could get the web involved in that one. The web in his life. But those two comics, I remember I picked up the coverless. I'd forgotten up until this moment, since we started this, how wonderful those Simon and Kirby Shield stories were. Lancelot Strong, right? Wasn't it?
Yes, absolutely. I love those stories. That was probably the most expensive comic I bought at the time when I bought back issue of Double Life of Private Strong. But it's wonderful stuff. Now everyone can get digital copies, and they reprinted it in Blue Ribbon Comics and all of that. But they did a marvelous job there. And the creators that they had on the MLJ characters are just immense. It's everyone's favorite comic creators in the Golden Age, in the Silver Age. I mean, Simon and Kirby relaunching these characters.
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's like a key part of the Silver Age, the beginning of the Silver Age, that people don't talk about much.
Yeah, right.
What DC did to reboot a bunch of their Golden Age characters. It was Simon and Kirby doing the Fly and Private Strong over at Archie as well.
I don't think you can underestimate that. I think that's a really big thing historically that's overlooked. The fact that it's Simon and Kirby should make more people take a look at it. Forget the intrinsic value of these particular characters and so on, but just the fact that it's Simon and Kirby, they should do it. And then if they do that, then they're going to discover some really great stuff. My favorite of the other characters, I love the Black Hood. And I love how many different really good takes on the Black Hood there have been. The most recent one, Under the Dark Circle stuff, was just phenomenal. And I've actually given those trade paperbacks as gifts to friends on more than one occasion, because I just think they're so wonderful. But I really, really wish that they would do a collection of the Mark Wheatley, Rick Burchett stuff from the Impact line on Black Hood. It's just phenomenal. I mean, with the addition,
Archie didn't release those digitally.
Yeah, they did, and I think I'm really glad to see the stuff out there. But I'm not a digital guy, aside from some of my own creative projects. I'm a collector. I want the stuff.
Right. Yeah. And Alex Toth, Neil Adams, Gray Morrow.
Yeah.
It was Neil Adams' first work was on the Fly. He had sent in submission pages, and they chopped off the bottom of his page that showed the transition because they liked it better than the actual artist who did the work. And they just glued it on there before printing it.
Yeah.
And
Alex Toth did those. Alex Toth did those great Fox.
Oh my gosh, those
Fox, right.
Yeah.
Right.
And then Gray Morrow had that really nice Black Hood. And then Gray Morrow did this one that I wish had gone somewhere. And when I was working on staff at Archie, I tried to push them to do more with it, which it was actually in the Sorcery. And it was the story with the Cobra character.
The Green Cobra, yes.
Remember
that was very good.
that story? And
Yes.
of course, it was a horror story, but it revolved around this pulp character. It was cool. It was like a Green Hornet character. And I mean, just the way Gray Morrow drew it, the way it was colored. Man, if they had done more just to take that character and done something with it.
I was never a colorist. I was never a colorist, but I often wondered if Gray's stuff was as easy to color as it looked, because he got a lot of good coloring jobs and his stuff was so cool.
No,
I have one more question for the three of you about the book. And I'm not familiar with what led to its creation other than your love of MLJ.
Oh, Paul sent me an email and asked me if I wanted to write the book.
That was easy.
Well, you had the website, right?
I came
Yes,
from
MLJ. I've got an MLJ website, mightycrusaders.net, and I've collected all the information on the Shield and all of the related characters. There used to be about 5 or 6 websites when I first got on the internet, and as those people dropped out, they gave me their websites, and so I incorporated them. I mean, initially I'm on GeoCities with a private Strong website for the Shield, and as they dropped out, I started compiling them. So that's why I call it the Mighty Crusader Network. One, because Archie owned mightycrusaders.com, so I needed mightycrusaders.net. And when I'm doing mightycrusaders.net, I wanted to call it Mighty Crusaders Network, since it was actually a network of 4 or 5 different sites. And so I had all the information already together, and it was just a matter of compiling it in book form.
Yeah, I threw up the cover on the screen there for a little bit, so
very
people
nice.
will know what we were talking about. But yeah, so yeah, that's so from my end of it, I don't remember now if John contacted me first or Archie contacted me
Or
or
Jon
I
B.
reached out to somebody else. But I do know that yeah, I took it on. It was probably Archie contacting me, and then I took it on, and then I got you involved, Rik, because I knew you had all that material. Because I figured, what's our best way to back into it, right? Well, a lot of the stuff already existed, and then it became, what could we reuse or refine, and then what did we have to create? And honestly, as I've said in different other interviews that I've done on this, we could probably double the length of that book. It's already a big book, but we actually did have a lot of content that didn't even make it into the book. But even beyond the content we already had in the can, we could probably come up with more, just because it's such a rich history and there's so many angles to cover on it. So yeah, it was a really incredible project. Well, definitely a blood, sweat, and tears project.
There were only
A lot of the
207.
sweat being John's.
Yeah, there were only 217 comics. So initially we were worried there wouldn't be enough material. And we put together an outline, or at least the Golden Age comics. And so we put together an outline, and we still weren't sure there was going to be enough material. And I remember that
it ended up being the opposite.
Sent us a copy of the Quality Companion to use as a guide for what he was looking for. And when we turned it in, he already told us, he says, I'm going to have to cut this down by half.
Yeah.
And we got a lot of new material as we were doing the book. People volunteered information, and people volunteered some artwork, and it was a fun project. I really enjoyed working on it.
We got some new interviews too, which was interesting. Getting Rik Buckler to talk about it. That's like a key piece of the book, I think. Because he was a major part of the whole Red Circle thing. Rest in peace, Rik.
And also, truth to tell, I'm a book designer as well as an author and a historian, and I did get the manuscript, and I did insist that more stuff had to be put into it. As far as there were some sections of history that, for instance, in the speaking of Neil Adams had a web. He took the character the Web and had him on the web for Archie Comics, and digging that, and calling up Continuity Studios and saying, hey, what can Neil, what can you let us have for the book? And he helped out for the book. And in the 1980s there was that Dark, what was the name of the imprint that they
the Spectrum line.
And right,
yeah, that didn't launch.
And digging and finding out more information about it was very cool to what a company. I mean, what a history that really transcended it. It parallels the history of superheroes, but it also is looking at comics in a commercial sense of like, what are the trends and where they, what's going on at the time. You can look at Chilling Adventures. What was it? Chilling Tales, Adventures in Sorcery. You know, it was
Chilling Adventures in Sorcery.
a Sabrina title, which was given over to Gray Morrow, and he did these two pair of comic books that are highly underrated and highly. That's where that Green Hornet kind of character had come from that you mentioned, Paul. So anyway,
well, no doubt, John, that you bolstered it up too, in a major way, absolutely, and we needed that because we were like so close to what we had, close to it, that sometimes when you're too close to it, you don't see. You need another set of eyes, and so we're really thankful for that. The funny thing, you mentioned the Spectrum. When I started working on staff at Archie, it was 1990, and I started as the assistant editor to Scott Fulop, and he had been like the editor on all that Spectrum stuff. And so like I got to see all the stuff, like there were still like stats lying around and all this stuff. And I'm like, what is this? And he told me about it. He's like, yeah, it's not happening. It's not going to print. And it's like, yeah, I got here like a year too late. Just
the Kelly Jones stuff alone, like holy moly.
There's a lot of secret history behind these companies where they actually dovetail together, because the Fly was originally Spider-Man and it was pitched to Harvey, and they changed that to the Silver Spider. And then you have Joe Simon sneak into the Harvey office and pull the script and all the art and give it to Jack Kirby to redraw as the Fly, which is why the Fly in the first story acts more like a spider and the spider acts more like a fly, because they flip them. And then you have the story that Jack Kirby then later told this story to Stan Lee, and Stan Lee took the original Spider-Man name, and Tommy Troy became Peter Parker, and it was all based on the original idea for the Fly. And you got the story with the round shield, where when Captain America came out and his costume looked like the MLJ shield, well, the MLJ people, Maurice Coyne was the M, and he was not an active partner, but he was the treasurer for the company. He bankrolled the whole company, and every time the company got in financial trouble, he was the one who financially bailed them out and would get paid back eventually. He didn't have any children, so he didn't continue in the thing when they went public and all of that. But it's interesting too, because Martin Goodman only hired relatives. That's why Stan Lee worked there. He was paranoid. So that means that Maurice Coyne, who was the treasurer for Timely Comics, also had to be a relative somehow. And so he was probably the money man behind Timely. There isn't a paper trail on that, but you just assume that all these people were working on the pulp magazines together. And then they started publishing comics together. And not only that, Simon and Kirby left Timely because Maurice Coyne told them that they were being cheated on their royalties and other expenses were being thrown into their books so that it looked like they weren't as profitable. And so you also have to think that there might have been something to that, since Maurice Coyne owned the competitive company as well.
Yeah. all it takes is one bad golf outing, and somebody can be hacked off at the other guy. One of the things that I think is really interesting about your book and about these characters in general, and with the stuff that John, you talked about adding to this, the filling in the various time periods, is that as a fan of dead universes, I collect a lot of failed comic book
They're
companies.
not dead.
No. Let me finish the point. As a guy who collects a lot of dead universes, what's interesting about these is since Archie became the predominant, and the Riverdale group became the predominant thing, the money maker for Archie Comics, that has allowed these characters to come and go periodically over the years. And I think that's fairly unique. Now, all the companies have characters that come and go, but for the whole line of superheroes to be briefly resurgent, come out, have wonderful new takes on them, some very enjoyable stories, some drastically different interpretations, I think that's sort of unique. And I sort of got that feeling reading the book that this is something I don't think any other company has a history that's similar in that vein. What do you guys think of that?
I think you're right. I think that that's both the joy and the bane of the Mighty Crusaders characters is that Archie is more successful. And so that allowed, when everyone else stopped publishing and all the Golden Age companies went out of business except for Timely and DC, that Archie had something to sell to keep going. And Archie's own popularity has kept the company going for 80 years. And without Archie, they wouldn't be able to come back because the other companies just went out of business.
Yeah, I just think that's unique. That it seems to me that it's unique to them, and that was one of the things I got out of the book. The other thing I'd say for anybody who hasn't read this book yet, if you have even a passing interest in these characters, it is a phenomenal read, phenomenal source of information. As much information as I know you packed in there. I only know from my own editorial experience that I'm sure that stuff was left on the cutting room floor, but it seems like you couldn't have fit anything else in there. But it really could take a person from being the most casual fan to being like, hey, I'm really interested in this stuff.
Well, I appreciate the plug for the book. I really do. It was a labor of love for all of us. We spent 3 years putting this together. Of course, the first year was just hammering out the contract with everyone. But Paul and I were working on it during that time anyway, and we're really happy with the way it came out. We are running low on time, and I did want to plug the new stuff that Archie's putting out, just in case people don't know. They did 2 miniseries, the Mighty Crusaders miniseries, and that one had a mixture of new and old characters in it. And so if you liked the Golden Age characters, Steel Sterling shows up and is part of the book. They did Archie Super Teens Meet the Mighty Crusaders, and that was all Golden Age heroes. So if you're a big Golden Age hero fan, they all appear in a nice super teen story. And Archie put together like 14 alternate covers on this, which you can find on their website. And so they've all got to be kind of really rare. They have a variety of trade paperbacks. And so they also have 2 new digital comics, one coming out this Wednesday. Of course, when you see it, it won't be this Wednesday anymore. And another one coming out next Wednesday. And that note was my timer that we have 1 minute to wrap this up. So I appreciate all of you here. We appreciate students.
Let me say this. Hey, Rik, you look great, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Amen, brother.
Yes, keep it up, Rik.
Yeah, I've lost 70
Thank you,
pounds
WonderCon and WonderCon fans.
Yeah, thank you all for joining us here. We appreciate the opportunity to bring this to your home. We love doing the panel in San Diego and at WonderCon, and hopefully next year in Anaheim.
Stay at home. Stay safe.
Stay safe, everyone. Yes.
Thanks a lot.